I'm Cruz Devon, and welcome to This Gay Life. Today our guest is David Weeda, and he's the Executive Director of the Human Rights Project out of Kansas City, and we're really glad to have him here. He's going to be talking a little bit about what's going on with the project, but first we'd kind of like to have him talk a little bit about himself. David, why don't you kind of give us a very short bio there?
Thank you, Cruz. It's really nice to be in Springfield and to have the chance to be on your show. You mentioned I'm from Kansas City, and I'm the director of an agency. It's called the Human Rights Project. We've been working in Kansas City since 1989. It's an agency, very grassroots, formed really at the request of some city officials who approached a few people in the community and said, what do you think about Kansas City pursuing getting inclusive civil rights legislation? In other words, adding sexual orientation to the existing civil rights law in Kansas City that would protect lesbian and gay citizens from discrimination. Well, we all sort of looked at each other and said, yeah, we think that's a good idea. Let's do what we need to do. So a very grassroots group of people came together and started pursuing, pulling community support and using that effort to educate the community and the elected officials, the city council, as to why we should have that sort of a law in Kansas City. So that's the beginning of the project back in 1989, and I've been involved with it since the very beginning. So that's what I've been doing in Kansas City now for 5 years. My career before that was sort of varied. I have a music degree and a hotel and restaurant management degree, and was working in restaurants and just doing sort of day-to-day hand-to-mouth living, and found myself using my activist voice more and more around women's choice issues, reproductive freedom issues, and lesbian and gay issues. And so it was sort of a natural fit when this opportunity arose in Kansas City to pursue this project. So that's what I've been doing.
Well, that's quite a position to be in. Where did you start as far as like being an activist? Tell us a little bit about
I really kind of trace this back to, I think it was second grade that I circulated my first petition. And it was yeah, actually I think it was around the issue of some dogs that I saw being mistreated on the school playground by the custodian of the school and several other students, and I decided that we should try to do something about getting these dogs to get better treatment when they were, stray dogs on the playground. But I really do remember circulating a petition. My mother told me what a petition was, so I thought it was time to do that. But my real activism, I guess, started late in high school, and I started sort of looking at the political process and realizing that individuals can make a change and that we each have a voice that can be used. And then in college, I got very involved with the peace movement. When I was in college, it was from 1977 to 1981, and that was sort of the phase of the peace movement that was mostly focused on anti-nuclear work. So I started organizing students around the nuclear freeze issue, and that led me into working with a lot of progressive people, and I got involved with the women's choice issue down at Emporia State when I was in college, and then moved to Kansas City and got very active with a group that we formed called the Choice Coalition in Kansas City. So I guess I have, my roots are sort of in peace and women's movement and environmental issues as well, and so it was a real natural for me to go on into gay rights activism.
You said that somebody came to you and said that this should be included.
Right. The early days of my activism around lesbian and gay issues was actually with ACT UP Kansas City, in the early days of ACT UP, and John Barnett, another friend of mine, we were testifying at City Council regarding including HIV status in the existing Civil Rights Ordinance, and we weren't even touching on sexual orientation at that point. Our goal was to see HIV status included as an example of a handicap, so that people who are afflicted with HIV would be protected from discrimination. After we gave our testimony, the assistant manager of the city's Human Relations Department approached us and basically said what I explained earlier, do we think it's time to perhaps pursue including sexual orientation? And John and I looked at each other and said, yes, we think it's time. It's like waving a great carrot in front of an activist's face. We immediately thought that we should go ahead and do that. So,
what was the process of starting the Human Rights Project? I mean, obviously you had a little bit of a group together already.
Well, it was really, as I said, grassroots, and I'm proud of the fact that it's been grassroots. We started out just as a group of people who knew each other and knew that we had this common interest in seeing progressive civil rights legislation in Kansas City. And with the context that we had and the friends we knew, we put together just a group of people who were willing to put out the effort and the energy of mobilizing a larger group of people. And I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to accomplish in 5 years. Within a very short time, we were assembling a considerable mailing list, and At this point, we are a membership organization with over 450 dues-paying members, and our constituency, or our mailing list, our constituency base is around 4,000 addresses of people who have expressed an interest in supporting the work, or at least being involved in knowing what's going on with the project. So it's grown considerably in 5 years, and we are still completely grassroots. We don't have any kind of grant funding. We're funded by people who make monthly contributions or send in contributions on a regular basis.
That's really good, and you're right. That is a lot of work.
Well, it's very exciting because it maintains ownership within the community, I think, and that's what I like about this, is that the volunteers who support the work feel very much that they're a part of it and that they have some say in the mission and what our goals are and what we're trying to accomplish in Kansas City.
One of your goals was just lately the amendment that was possibly going to go on the ballot, but ended not having their signatures turned in. That was one of the big...
Right. The Human Rights Project was one of 5 organizations that exist in Missouri that did go on to what I call the campaign committee, sort of sitting at the campaign committee table for the Show Me Equality campaign, which was the campaign that we put together to oppose the initiative that was mounted in Missouri, started last year. And that certainly monopolized most of my time and energy, and the good thing I see out of that is that we were able to mobilize so many more people statewide around the issue, and certainly evidence here in Springfield as well that all of you down here that were aware of the initiative really put together some good coalitions and a lot of work to oppose that. And of course we were very pleased on July the 8th when we learned that they were not turning in any signature petitions at all.
You're talking about coalition building and stuff like that. What are some of the other groups that where you were working with? You said Show Me Equality.
Right. Well, I think on a real personal level, my activism over the last 10 years has, I hope that I've learned that the most work you can accomplish is best done when you build coalitions with other allies. And that was one of the best things I saw during the Show Me Equality campaign, is that we were able to realistically frame our campaign around the facts that a lot of people were actually coming under attack by this proposed initiative, that even though the lesbian and gay community was at the brunt of their attack and that we would be seeing the most evidence of it had this amendment gone through, that most people who understand civil rights issues and the human condition understand that that was a really, I think, a rhetorical smokescreen to say that they were trying to prohibit lesbian and gay civil rights. I think the reality is that these are right-wing extremists mounting a very dangerous campaign to put forth their theocratic agenda, not just in Missouri but nationwide. We saw more than just Missouri being under attack this way this last year. There were 7 or 8 other states that were conceivably in line to have a similar initiative on their ballot in November. I'm very pleased to say that Missouri is one of 7 or 8 states that won't be having it on their ballot. At this point, it looks like Utah or Idaho.
Idaho, yeah.
Yeah, is the only state that's going to be facing it.
Well, with the amendment and building all the coalitions and stuff like that, I mean, besides building a really strong base and almost a sense of community and connectedness against like this injustice, does it look, what's coming up now? I mean, what are some other things that the Human Rights Project is working on?
Well, I'll finish an answer to the first question. I think that will lead into the answer to that one, and that is, you sort of asked what the other groups were that were involved in the coalition, I think, and you mentioned the word justice just now, and that reminded me that many people understood that this is a justice issue, and that's why we were able to draw in what I think are the really strong mainstream churches, the Christian denominations, that felt a real need to oppose the initiative based on the fact that it was a justice issue. I know that 2 groups, one in St. Louis and one in Kansas City, formed, and I'm hoping that they will continue to work. In Kansas City, they're calling themselves Clergy United for Justice, and they were able to get over 275 ministers from mainline Christian denominations to sign on to a statement opposing the initiative. We had labor concerns involved. The AFL-CIO in Kansas City was a major part of our coalition that opposed the initiative. I mentioned the religious people. The choice community across Missouri was very involved in this fight. So I think as long as we framed the truth of this issue, that this was right-wing extremists attacking a broad community in Missouri, that's what enabled us to form the coalition that brought it to a defeat. And now in response to your last question about where do we go from here, I think that that the last 10 months has provided us with really an incredible opportunity in Missouri. I think that we are now set to go much further than we would have been able to had we not fought the campaign that we had for the last 10 months. The visibility is increased. I said many months ago that if nothing else during this campaign, that I assume that every dinner table in Missouri will at some point discuss the whole issue of sexual orientation because of the high visibility the campaign would render. And I think that that's happened. I think that many people for the first time are acknowledging that yes, they do know lesbian and gay people, or they have a friend, or they have a relative. And I think only good can come of that. I think if you look at our culture in general, that we sometimes tiptoe around the issue of sexuality to such a degree that it really breeds some unhealthy things in our culture. And I hope that if nothing else, that the more extensively we talk about the issue, that more people will become comfortable and healthy with their sexuality and their sexual orientation, whatever it may be. And I really think that that's the goal of gay rights activists, is that we acknowledge sexual orientation as a fact of everyone's lives, and that it should be pursued in an honest and healthy fashion that allows us to live productively and healthily and happily with each other.
You talk about a healthy sexual orientation. Within the state of Missouri, though, there seems to be certain laws and stuff that
well, Missouri is
no, it's not okay.
Missouri is one of several states that still has what I would hope that most Missourians would think is a very archaic law still on the books, and that is a law that allows for government interference in really the most private sanctuary of our lives, and that is our sexuality, our bedrooms. There still is a law in Missouri. It's subsection 3 of the sexual misconduct law, which outlines that it is illegal in Missouri to have consensual sex between adults of the same gender.
Is that what they're calling the sodomy laws?
Well, it's often misnamed the sodomy law. Sodomy is defined differently in different states, and in Missouri we do have what are considered sodomy laws, but they actually are part of our rape code, the rape laws, and sodomy in Missouri is defined as forced sexual intercourse. So whenever anybody says that the gay rights group is trying to overturn the sodomy laws, I want to publicly proclaim that that's not true at all. We very much are in favor of maintaining the sodomy laws in Missouri, which apply to rape. But what we're trying to overturn is subsection 3 of the sexual misconduct law, which very explicitly states that two people of the same gender who are consenting adults should be not allowed to have consenting sex. And so that is much further than I want the government to go into my private life.
And most people.
And I think most rational thinking people would feel the same way. You know, the reality that lesbian and gay people do exist and always have existed, and we probably should be given you know, society's consent to have fulfilling lives that don't really affect or influence other people.
On the sexual misconduct laws, does that have like any stipulation on ages and stuff like that, or?
No, it's clearly stated that anyone of the same gender, you know.
Which and it's not like a higher penalty for like someone under 21 or?
Well, the same laws are maintained for everyone with regard to juvenile or adolescent sexuality. You know, everybody is prohibited to some degree depending on age. Age of consent laws are applicable across the board. But the sexual misconduct law specifically applies to lesbian and gay people outlawing sex at any age.
Well, yeah, that happens.
I've often thought it would be amazing to see what would happen if we would, you know, rally enough people to just turn themselves in. You know,
I read about that the other night, and I just thought, gosh, that would sure tie up the courts for quite a long time.
Well, it'd be curious to see, you know, just what the response would be. I've proclaimed many times, and I'll do it again today here on television, that, you know, I have committed a crime in Missouri. I've broken the sexual misconduct law before. So.
Isn't that a misdemeanor, though?
It's a misdemeanor, yeah.
Well, a misdemeanor a day, you know. We were talking about youth, and I know the program has some definite sites, or you have some definite sites about youth, and a lot of people kind of get edgy when you start talking about youth, because then they think, oh, you're going to pervert something, you're going to take something over, you're going to warp their minds and stuff.
Well, I'll come at it from the different perspective, and I get really edgy when people stop talking about youth and try to live in a fantasy world where they think that youth aren't thinking about sexuality and aren't pursuing sexuality. I take a much more realistic approach to the fact that all people at some point in their lives explore sexuality, and I think we're doing a real disservice to young people by not giving them information and leading them down some rosy path of what we think sexuality for them should be. I'm really in favor of a broad spectrum of sex education that allows all children, all young people, to pursue sexuality at a very healthy pace, to understand what the options are, what exists in the real world, and to have a better understanding of not only their own sexuality, but that of their peers. Because after all, we're trying to live together in a world and in a community where we understand and accept, I hope, each other. And to not provide factual information based on reality and the experiences of human beings is a real disservice to youth. So I think part of the work, my work at least personally, is that we encourage young people to have dialogue with professionals, with their teachers, with their counselors, and certainly with their parents. I have a real fear that most parents still in 1994 in America have some uncomfortableness talking with their children about sex and sexuality. So I'd like to see that change. I think we'd have a much healthier culture in general if all of us get to the point where it's a topic that's more easily discussed.
Well, how do you think that affects, I mean, obviously there's a definite volatile situation in any teenager's life. How do you think that affects suicide and suicidal thoughts?
Well, there's no question that the studies have shown that teen suicide is the highest it's ever been, and in the United States we lead the world in teen suicides. And it's really a sad notion to think that supposedly the most progressive, well-educated, economically sound nation in the world doesn't know how to raise children to the point of being comfortable with who they are and what their lives are. Some of that research indicates that lesbian and gay teens are 2 to 3 times more likely to attempt or even succeed in committing suicide. I think we have a real challenge ahead of us for all of our young people to help them get through that rough time. I'm 35 years old, but I still remember the time I went through as a young person and the decisions I had to make, and I felt I was making them very much on my own because it was not an issue or a topic I could talk about with anyone. So I hope that through activism and through working with communities that we can somehow create those environments where people can talk about these important issues and save some lives, save some heartache. I can't think of anything worse for parents than to lose a child at a young age through suicide.
Well, you would think that, I mean, on mainstream TV, there's been so many shows and stuff, and the topic of being gay or being homosexual or having AIDS, there's been so many allusions to the gay lifestyle. You would think that that would be much more easy to deal with.
Well, and you use the word gay lifestyle, which is it's a good word to use in certain contexts, but I think that in some cases that word has become sort of a caricature that's been pinpointed often by those who oppose lesbian and gay civil rights or the notion that we even exist. And so I think we've set up a dynamic in this country of one side of an issue that really feels that lesbian and gay people make a choice and that it's an immoral choice, an unreligious choice, a perverted choice. And for me, it's just, you know, the opposite side of that issue is the reality for me as a gay person and as having worked in this community for a long time. I know that there's no choice involved. The only choice that might be involved is when we choose to live our lives happily and productively and without regard for those who are trying to oppress us. But I think the people who come from this feeling that it's a choice fall right into that pattern of then assuming that we're going to be influencing others to make the same choice, and nothing could be further from the truth. I hope I've already explained my mission with youth is to help youth make their own choices and to understand that they may have a sexual orientation that is lesbian or gay, and that it's not something that they can change, and that they should try to make a situation as best as they can by creating a world where they can be comfortable and happy with their sexual orientation. The visual images we've seen of lesbian and gay people on TV shows in recent years, I think, really have been improving. The stereotypes are changing and being eliminated. I was talking with someone yesterday and pointing out the fact that really lesbian and gay people as a minority group, we are the only group that crosses into every other minority. You know, we have African American gay people, we have Hispanic gay and lesbian people, we have Jewish, Catholic, Muslim,
white collar,
Hindu, white collar, blue collar, homeless gay and lesbian people, and very affluent gay and lesbian people, and everything in between. And if nothing else, that tells me that that's why we have to build coalitions, because we are such a broad group of people. You know, we're represented in every field and in every area of the country.
Within that polarizing dynamic that you were talking about, there's got to be some safe spaces. I know there's some youth groups that are gay-oriented, and there's also like PFLAG. In our area, we haven't got a PFLAG. I'm sure in Kansas City they do. Is that helpful?
Yeah,
to the
it
youth?
helps a lot. I think that the visibility that we've seen over the last 10 months because of the initiative campaign will help to form new groups, new chapters around the state. In Kansas City, we do have PFLAG, which is Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, and it's a chapter of the national group PFLAG. And I really think all it takes is that spark of energy, maybe one or two people to say, this is something I want to be involved with. And in the case of PFLAG, I would assume that it would be a parent who would just finally get to the point where they need to create that support system, an environment where they can share their experiences about having a gay or lesbian child with other parents. And I've seen incredible results come from those groups, and people really do make the changes in their lives to better understand the people that they love and care about. And I can't think of anything better that can come out of this movement than to create those spaces where people feel supported and want to go out and make some changes in the world to make it better for everybody. In terms of youth, I think that we'll see more and more opportunities for youth to join and form support groups, and not just gay and lesbian youth, but their allies, their friends, because I'm seeing that happen more and more in high schools where the issue is talked about more freely and honestly, is that youth who identify as straight are very willing to come forward as allies to their lesbian and gay peers. And I certainly wish when I was in high school that I would have had some, most of my friends, of course, were straight, and had I been able to share my deep thoughts and my personal life with them on a friendship basis, I would have felt that support that I missed, and I hope that that's what youth are finding today.
Yeah, the support of PFLAG can be very good. There's some other support things as far as like, I know up in Kansas City you have a lot of luxuries that we don't have yet down here, like hotlines and things like that. In fact, a lot of people when they come into town, they have no idea of even where to look for things. I mean, what are some ideas of some things that we might be able to start down here? I mean, besides, I mean, obviously a hotline would be really great.
Well, you pointed out that, in a metropolitan area you do have more opportunities just because of the perceived, and I think it really is just a perceived cultural thing. When I've been down to Springfield to visit, I've always met incredibly active, involved people. I just think it has to be a sort of a different type of activism. It's not always as easy to be as visible as we'd like to be right away. I think that comes with time, but I know for a fact that people in Springfield are mobilizing around not just lesbian and gay issues, but all of the issues that concern us as people who have a progressive social agenda, a social agenda that really embraces diversity and supports people making decisions in their lives for the better. And I think that work is happening, and I think that there are groups in Springfield that are doing that work and beginning to build those support systems. So give yourself some credit.
There's a lot of people who are working towards a more healthy community and a more integral part of the community. But there are still a lot of people out there that are afraid of the violence that might happen to them. And we've heard so often, like after an amendment like this that is like either been put on the ballot or after it's been voted out or something, that a lot of violence comes up. Do you know about this?
Violence against the lesbian and gay community is pervasive and has been increasing for many years. It's really sad for us to see the statistics come in on an annual basis and realize that while we're gaining visibility around our issue, that perhaps in some ways that visibility is creating a backlash, and that while there are people out there still who are very willing to not only oppress and I think hate lesbian and gay people, but that they're willing to take it to that extra level of violence. And that's scary for those of us who are activists and involved in this to have to weigh what it is we're doing that's creating this atmosphere where people are more willing to attack people. And it's certainly a fear, and I think evidenced by the overturning of your bias crimes ordinance down here, that it's really a wake-up call, I hope, for justice-loving people, for people who understand that there are communities in our culture that are under attack, and that we need to think through ways that we can legislatively, I hope, stop that in some way. And I hope that Springfield, went through that process and has learned something from it. I think there were some really violent attacks against some lesbian and gay people during that, or preceding the vote that you had on the bias crimes ordinance. And if nothing else, that's evidence right there. I guess maybe this is a good time to bring in that that nasty two-word phrase that we've been hearing all over the country, and that is special rights. You know, I really would like to challenge those people who accuse us of pursuing special rights when we are trying to get included in civil rights laws or in hate crimes laws. I don't think there's anything special whatsoever about saying that we should be protected from discrimination like everyone else. You know, our Constitution supposedly says we're all protected from discrimination. I think when we include those categories that are clearly targeted for discrimination, that all we're doing is affirming what the Constitution says, and there's really nothing special about that. Again, in the a bias crimes setting, I believe that the people who opposed the bias crimes framed it as a special rights for homosexuals issue. Well, I don't see anything so special about acknowledging the fact that lesbian and gay people are part of a group that is frequently, and probably most frequently, singled out for violent attacks in our culture. And when you put forth legislation that would somehow require not only the gathering of statistics but also an increased penalty for those who perpetrate these crimes, there's nothing so special about that at all. That's, I think, merely attempting to create a just system which does penalize the perpetrator.
I think that's one of the wide views that you find with that with the extreme right, is that anytime that you ask for the same rights as anybody else and say, hey, stop, you know, discriminating against me, then you're obviously asking for oh so much more than you actually deserve as a United States citizen. But we are United States citizens. We're born here. I mean, there's nothing that different from us than anybody else.
Well, I think they've lucky for them, they've hit upon a two-word phrase that's very quickly said and without a lot of thought given to it.
It's still Jell-O.
Yeah, without a lot of thought given to that phrase, special rights, people think that's something that they want to oppose. Well, quite frankly, I oppose special rights for anyone also. I'm in absolute, complete favor of providing equal rights for everyone, and we don't have a short response to special rights. I guess it comes from the fact that people often say that lesbian and gay people are already protected from discrimination along with everyone else because of the Constitution. Well, if that's the case, then I have to challenge them with, then why do attorneys not even take a case in a jurisdiction that does not have an inclusive civil rights ordinance? In other words, if sexual orientation is not included explicitly in a civil rights law, and somebody calls up and says, I lost my job because they are perceiving me to be a gay man, an attorney in that jurisdiction will say, gee, I'm really sorry, there's nothing that can be done. I have no recourse under the current law. So.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's been very interesting speaking with you. It's been such a great thing to have you down as a guest. We've got to wrap up a little bit here. Where do you see the community going at this point? We've got a couple of minutes.
I'll just quickly touch again on what I said as the opportunity. I think that Missouri is really staged right now to pursue statewide coalition building. Those of us in Missouri who understand that we have a common goal in opposing right-wing extremism, not just in Missouri but all over the country. I think we see stealth candidates being run for school boards, city councils, municipal boards of all sorts. We see Republican Party takeovers by right-wing extremists. I think we need to be really aware that we all have something to lose by sitting back and not participating, and we have incredible things to gain by joining forces and opposing that sort of very un-American, very unjust behavior that could lead to a really dangerous society from my perspective. So I hope that we can pursue justice, freedom, and equality for each of us as we pursue our common coalitions.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for having me down.
If we all stand up, then hey, we all have rights.
Yep.
I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here on This Gay Life, and especially my guest, David Weeda, Executive Director of the Human Rights Project. If you'd like some more information about this, there's the address and the telephone number, and go ahead and give them a call, or if you don't happen to get that, give us a call at our number, which will be coming up shortly. And I'd like to thank you again for joining us. I'm Cruz Devon.